Greetings and salutations, my fellow geeks, and welcome to episode 71 of the Okie Geek podcast. I'm Michael Cross.
And I'm Josh Unruh.
And our guests this week are fellow podcasters Robbie Hurlocker and Vinton Bayne of Hamilton, the podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's been a great time.
Now, you guys are taking a 2-week break, so we thought we'd have you here instead.
Right. You don't talk about Hamilton enough, so come here.
That's right. And I guess the first thing is I just kind of want to ask each of you what got you into Hamilton in the first place.
Well, I have always been a musical theater person, and I've really enjoyed going up and just learning about everything that's on Broadway, everything that's off Broadway. I got my start into musical theater with Godspell, and so I'm used to listening to stories from the past in musical format and going through all these really fun things. And so I have a couple friends who are a little closer to the Broadway scene than I am, and they were actually guests on our show in episodes 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. My high college roommate and his wife were essentially loving this thing called Hamilton, and they said, hey, you need to get to know this thing. We saw it the opening month of when it was on Broadway, going to Broadway, and I got to have a wonderful, they just sat me down in their room, and we listened to the entire soundtrack, and they were explaining the staging to me, saying, hey, at this moment, the person grabs a bullet, and they're walking across the stage slowly towards Hamilton's head. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, this is awesome. And so it was a nice little segue between being able to listen to the album and before I got to ever see anything, any clips of anything. It was nice to kind of relive that. But they kind of brought me into that.
That's really cool. Vinton, where did you...
Robbie.
Okay, so, yeah.
So
Simple answer.
He had heard the musical, and then he had sent me a text or something and said, you need to check this thing out. And I've always been into stage performances, but I've never really been the musical side of that. And there's not many musicals that really catch my eye, and that just seemed like more frou-frou. And I was like, I don't know about musicals. That seems out there a little bit for me. But there are a few that I really love and enjoy. And since watching Hamilton, I'm now a huge musical fan. I love all musicals.
Yeah, it really grabs you into wanting to listen to what else is being put out, especially if you do Rent or something like that.
Yeah,
obviously
for sure.
Influenced by that.
But I've always been a huge hip hop fan, and so when he said that it was hip hop American history, and I love history, I was like, this is weird. And I didn't really have time to listen to it for a few weeks. But then I went on this long road trip, taking a Southwest American road trip across through the Grand Canyon and everything, and a lot of highway time. My wife and I listened to the whole album while driving on the highway straight through in one listen, and we were both in tears by the end of it. It was amazing. Right. It changed my life.
I think it was a long time before you responded to my text message about, hey, you need to listen to this.
Yeah.
You were taking your time.
I was texting you while driving for sure, while we were going through the highway.
Was
through
this
tear-stained eyes.
Or was this
That was
last year?
November, early November last year.
Okay.
Right.
Josh, when did you get into Hamilton?
Very similar time for very similar reasons. Yeah, it wasn't going to be Vinton goes Robbie and I go Vinton and Robbie. Like that was the thing. I was kind of like vaguely aware of it and had wanted to check it out because I'm also a longtime hip hop fan, but I'd been thinking, I don't know, this is going to sound a little condescending, and I mean very specific things about it because I was also reading like epic poetry at the time that I was starting to have these thoughts that I was like, I'd really like to see or hear, I guess, some more I don't know, broader themes in hip hop that don't let go of the things that are very intrinsically hip hop.
Yeah.
And that's real talk. That's some tricky business. I mean, you could lose either one very quickly. And then so I started hearing about Hamilton, and then when these guys started, when I would just peripherally hear them talking about how I needed to be listening to Hamilton. And so I did. And here we are. However, unlike Vinton, who luckily got to go all the way through at once, I was listening to it with my kid, and he has a lot of favorites in the first act, you guys.
Right.
Yes.
So we spent, I was like sort of trapped in the first act for a long time.
I listened to the first act 3 times before I even started Act 2.
I was about to do that too. My only thing, of course, I'm new to this. I've known about Hamilton. I work for NPR, so there's a lot of talk of Hamilton.
It's come up.
Hamilton's done, yes, and everyone knows about it. I'm not a hip hop fan, but I'm a musical fan, a history fan. So I was really worried about getting it. Finally, the library got the copy, and I was like, I got to have this. So I listened to it, and I was the same way. I got through the first act. And I did go immediately to the second act and listen to it, but I didn't want to because I knew that things weren't quite as good in the Revolutionary War. That's fantastic. And as said, winning is easy, governing is harder. I knew that this stuff was not going to be as great in Act 2.
Right.
I just didn't know how bad it was going to get.
Exactly.
Early Act 2, though, it's just as contentious as the war. It's just sort of internal. Mm-hmm. It's not, but I mean, then you get a little further on, and it's like, oh, here, was it Madison? I forget who it was. It's like, can we get back to politics? Like,
please?
I am that.
Yeah. Who is it that
Madison.
says please?
Yeah.
It's like, because all this sad.
Like, I'm still, I think I was telling Robbie and Vinton earlier this week, I accidentally listened. I was cooking and listening and accidentally didn't stop it before it's quiet uptown. And I was like, why?
That will rip your heart out.
Why? Yep. And then, just mascara running all over the place.
It's the first time I heard that, and of course, Quiet Uptown. And then, can we get back to politics, please? I said the same thing. It's like, really? Because Cabinet Battle 1.
And the answer is sort of.
As a history wonk, Cabinet Battle 1 is probably one of my favorites because it really is history. It's the battle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists right there.
Well, and as a hip-hop wonk, that's amazing for me to do that song because that's what you grow up on. It's people battling in hip hop, and you're like, oh, this is in the album. They have something like this just recorded. This is amazing.
They have 2 rap battles right there.
How perfect to take these politics and people going against each other with their ideas and change it to a hip hop battle where they're going against each other with their flows and rhymes.
Yeah, I was just very
watching this past cycle's debates. I don't see any reason that they couldn't just turn them into rap battles. Yeah, like the skill set is not any more a governing skill set than debate, than that style, that style of debate. Let's just, make it more entertaining for me. Rhyme some stuff. Get some proper disses in there.
That is definitely the most natural transition into the genre of hip hop, is that when you have 2 arguments back and forth going against each other. And I mean, that's the natural setting for a hip hop battle.
Just one side or the other. Mm-hmm. Just now, you guys have gone. I'm listening to the podcast. I've only gotten to episode 9, but I did actually listen to the recent one about the Electoral College. We won't talk about the Electoral College. What I want to talk about is listeners, if you're out there and if you love Hamilton and you haven't heard this podcast, you need to, because one of the things that I love is I will likely never see this on Broadway. The best I can get to is it might tour or they might make a movie about it. Which is pretty much the only way I'm going to get to see it.
It's touring. I think Chicago's as close as it is right now.
Chicago and then San Francisco.
I mean, it's not original cast, obviously, but it's touring. Yeah. I would go to Chicago even in the winter.
And they do have a recording of it. They just haven't released it. They've had the recording for a while now.
That's true.
And they just don't have any plans of what to do. Well, they might have plans, but they haven't announced anything of what they're
like a kind of video, movie version
They did a full video recording of the cast before anyone actually stepped off the stage and said, we're done with this for now. So that way they have all the original cast members in this recording archived for a later date, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I can't blame them for not doing it before the tour starts, because you'd have a lot of people who just wouldn't. Oh, well, if I can get there's a little magic about the original cast.
Sure.
There's magic about that, but there's also magic about any live performance as well.
Yeah.
This is a medium that everyone enjoys in the audio format from the original cast recording, but it's also something that is designed to be a visual medium.
Yeah.
You're supposed to see this and experience it, and not all of us get that opportunity, but I think it's approachable enough. You can get it through the album, but I think that this is something designed to be experienced in that theater setting with that intimate relationship between the people on the stage and the audience members too.
If you're a fan of musical theater, if you're a fan of any kind of theater, you would know that going and seeing I've seen live performance of many shows many times, because every time you go see a show, even if it's the same cast, it's going to be different.
Right.
But a lot of people in today's society, in today's movie and visual society, don't know that. And so I think that's why they're a little reticent to release any kind of video, because they're worried that people in today's YouTube society will go, well, I've already seen it. I don't need to see it again.
Yeah.
Which isn't true. It's going to be different, and that's going to be the beauty of it. When you guys talked about the new guy who came in as the King George,
Rory O'Malley.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to bring a whole new set to it, and everybody who brings it in, especially because it is hip hop, so it's going to be different.
be a little improvisational, I suspect.
Yeah, a lot of the roles, they do let the person playing that role have a bit of say of how they perform it, and they can change little things here and there. Sure. And of course, there's always the way that you move on stage. Famously, was it Beyonce that said that she was going to steal the dance from King George?
I think you're right. Yeah,
that's right.
I think it was. She was like, I gotta have that for my performance.
The walk, fantastic.
The walk, the way he like strutted.
And did I hear you guys say that they're talking about opening up the gender roles, even that basically saying?
So essentially, they wanted to list some type of open casting for certain roles, so that we might see that not only is our first American president being played by a person of color, but we might also see that this is a role that could be opened up to being played by a female. And so you might see the original president being played by a female president, just to kind of break that barrier a little bit. If we can't break it in our actual political context, we'll break the glass ceiling on the stage.
Well, I like the idea. I like the idea that and it was the beauty of when I listened to Hamilton was the realization that you didn't have to be a certain person to play a role, which is unusual on Broadway. I think even if you look at Rent, where I the first time I saw Rent, or heard Rent, actually, same thing as I heard it long before I ever saw it. I thought, well, this could be played by a multitude of people, but for some reason, every time you see Rent on stage, no matter what, they're always the same race and the same gender every time. And I'm like, you really actually can kind of mix that up, but they don't ever do it. But I thought Hamilton was one of the few musicals where you could actually, anybody could play whatever role. There's certain, Schuyler Sisters would be awkward if it was the Schuyler Brothers, but.
Well, I don't know, because it's been a minute, but those three kids, I know that this video, you guys saw this video.
The Hamill kids, when they go
was
out?
Was it that? It was just these three. There were three boys that did.
Oh,
the Schuyler Sisters with a singer who I think is Broadway, but I am not a musical theater person, and she did the Burr part. I'd have to go dig it back up.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's
but they were
some
all
of the
8
kids
or 9,
from
7, 8, 9.
One of the boys from the School of Rock performance on Broadway right now, and a couple of the other performances. One of the kids from maybe Fun Home. I don't recall now, but I do remember.
I had no
what
recognition because that's not my area. But I was like, that's amazing. And they are. It was even adult woman as Burr with these three kids as the Schuyler Sisters, and that part in the song the Schuyler Sisters, and it was amazing. So I don't know, very interesting. When you were talking about switching things, I know that there are a couple of roles that switch, and it would be sort of interesting instead of like if they didn't switch this way, they cross switched, so that whoever played Lafayette goes to play I forget Reynolds' first name, Mrs. Reynolds. Anyway, and then whoever played Peggy gets to go do Thomas Jefferson.
Interesting.
You could play with it, is what I'm saying. They have some roles that are built to be played by multiple people. Yeah.
Talking about
by the same multiple roles by the same person. So English is hard.
Those transitions.
They do that. I like the way they do that. The way you guys described how the switch between them, especially when we fought with him, is the same two people that fought with him in the Revolutionary, but fought with him in Congress.
That's really uncomfortable for me because I really like Lafayette, and Thomas Jefferson sucks. So I'm admitting that is a difficult transition.
That's supposed to be, yes, but I think that's supposed to be. I think that's why I like the juxtaposition. Doing it to me, that they've chosen that way. I feel sorry for Peggy though. I don't know what else if she plays anything else, but it's like the Schuyler Sisters and Angelica.
Well,
Eliza,
she does,
and Peggy.
She has a big role,
In the second act, she actually comes back as Mariah Reynolds.
Oh, Mariah, that's what it is.
That person.
I kept wanting to say Maria, and I knew that wasn't right. That's right. She comes back as Mariah Reynolds.
It's spelled Maria, and in the musical, it's pronounced Mariah. And so I've heard audiobooks, biographies. I don't know. I've heard it both ways. I've heard narrators for my audiobooks, biographies saying Maria. I don't know what's right.
Yeah, I can't. I have a real hard time listening to Just Say No. I really have. Because
say no to this.
Say no to this. Yeah.
Or say no to this. Yeah.
Those drug campaigns from the '90s are coming back.
Just
say no.
They're in forever.
On the mixtape, they decided to add in a song "Say Yes to This" from Mariah Reynolds.
Yeah, you were mentioning
so good.
That's real fun.
Yeah, and that's another one that I skipped with my son. I was like, we're going to skip that one. He's like, I said, he cheats on his wife. It's horrible. You'll come up with, but I did actually keep in, of course, the Reynolds pamphlet because you got to understand this. Yeah. I just kind of give you an idea. He cheats on his wife. It's awful, horrible. we're moving on to the next one.
How old is your son?
10.
10? Okay, yeah, that's totally understandable. I mean, one of the things I love about this musical is watching children fall in love with it. And there are definitely parts of this musical that are not necessarily children appropriate. Right. And you don't want to get into all the topics. So parents listening to this shouldn't just let their kids just push play unless you have listened to it first and you're okay with that. Like, make that call yourself. But one of the things that has been amazing and magical about watching people fall in love with Hamilton is watching kids start asking analytical questions like, hey, if Aaron Burr's doing this, why doesn't he just do this instead? Or like, well, yeah, he's a real person with flaws and with like real things that he did and real complicated aspects to himself. And so it's interesting to see them dive into history in a way that they're actually asking questions and they're engaging with it in a fascinating way that I haven't seen in a lot of ways. I haven't seen in a lot of different settings before.
Nothing like this has ever actually engaged the kids before. Now, granted, yes, the first 5 words of the musical might not be kid appropriate.
Okay, but so I don't know if I've got to tell you guys this. All right, Robbie and Vinton and I hang out a lot. Off mic, but that's why I say I'm not sure that I got to tell you guys this specifically. But I mean, how many times at this point have Elijah and I listened to this? Like hundreds at this point,
right?
And it wasn't. I mean, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that we're listening to it, and the first lines are, "You can bleep me if you need to." Michael.
I don't know. No, actually, because I don't,
because they're not
bad words, and they are
not even a.
That's what I had to tell. That's what I had to tell my son. It's like, okay, wait a minute, a bastard son of a whore. That is historically accurate.
Yeah.
It is completely correct.
Yeah.
And these are not bad words because they are used. It's like calling a dog a bitch.
Right.
Now,
that was something we had to talk about when we started the podcast because we wanted a clean rating, and we were like, can we say bastard and
Can
whore?
we quote these words?
Quote these
words?
And we finally said
Historical,
yes, because it makes sense. It has a meaning. It's not a curse word. It's not being used as a curse word.
Now, because they're used historically correct and in their correct
I have
form.
a whole other conversation about how stupid and the whatever.
Now,
we'll
personal story on this one. When I was in probably 3rd or 4th grade, I asked my preacher father, I'm the son of a preacher man, and I asked him, hey, is bastard a bad word? Because I heard people at school throwing it around. And he said, he gave me the scholarly professorial answer to that, saying, no, technically it is this. And he explained that this is an illegitimate a child born out of wedlock. He explained to me this. And so I went back to school, and what I got out of that instructions from my father was, I can say this word to people because it's not a bad word. Yeah. And so I was able to just go around, and I was just using it left. I was not using it accurately and respectfully. And so, it was an interesting moment where I had to kind of grow and learn that not every word that is technically not a curse word should be applied to every setting, and you have to use, it may be acceptable in certain contexts and not in others. So
it's actually worse, I would say. I think on your Hancock Creative podcast, it's been a minute when you guys talk about the difference between how did you draw the lines? Curse words and something
swear
else.
Words and
swear words and curse words.
Cursing
because
is
bastard
different.
is a curse.
Yeah.
You are labeling somebody with more weight than because they had everything to do with their parents' marital status when they were born. So let's make sure their lives are more complicated.
It's the sins of the father type of situation.
So the thing, the bit at my house when Elijah finally asks me what's a bastard and what's a whore. Now, we live in the year of our Lord 2016, aka the dumpster fire. So heads up, this is not the first time that my 9-year-old and I have had a conversation about the inequality between the sexes.
Yes.
So whore was actually relatively, and I gritted my teeth and we did say no to this one time, and then the rest of the time I kind of skip it. But you're getting the whole thing. This is usually for married people, and he stepped out and now we skip. But so we'd already had a lot of the sort of foundational stuff for this. My wife had just stepped out to grab some stuff from the garden when he asks me this, and I had to go, hold on. And I stepped out to the garden and was like, heads up, when you come back in, we are going to be in the middle of explaining what bastards and whores are. So don't freak out. And she was like, thanks for the heads up, because this was a conversation that was worth anyway. So then I start to explain illegitimate. That's why we talked about being an orphan and not being taken care of, and how he went very much from home to home and was on his own and taking care of his little brother and blah blah blah. And the best part of this, not only did he completely get it, because again 2016 gave us ample opportunity to lay this foundation, but my wife is a child support enforcement for the state of Oklahoma. She comes in the middle of this conversation and gets to her 9-year-old say, you know how we've never really talked about what I do at work? Like we had kind of shielded him from a lot of that.
Oh, wow.
She got to say the stuff that happened to Hamilton, we work very, very hard to make sure as much as possible doesn't happen to people. That's my job. And that's incredible. Literally the first time, because again, you never know. You don't tell your 2 and 3 and 4 and 5-year-old what mom does at work
for the department
when that's the job.
Right.
But eventually, the opportunity arises, and hey, thanks Hamilton. She finally got to talk to her kid about what she does all day.
I think that, we run a podcast that is springboarded from the lyrics of Hamilton the musical, so it's totally, just doesn't even need to be said, but the conversations that we can have just springboarded from the Hamilton lyrics are incredible. The relevance of the topics addressed are just fantastic, and we talked about the way we springboard into different relevant topics here in your family, and we could talk about how gender equality is something that is directly addressed throughout a lot of this, and the casting would answer some of that as well. But just in some of the lyrics, you see that Alexander Hamilton is called insane in a positive way. He says, this kid is insane, man, and it's awesome. You're supposed to be excited and riled up about how great he is. Then Angelica Schuyler comes on the scene, and she says, hey, I've been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine, and so men look at me and say I'm intense or insane, and it's not as positive in that moment. And you see
the
this
hysteria.
The same word is there.
And if there's another character who is very much played as the opposite number, the equal but opposite number to Hamilton, it's Angelica.
Yeah.
And so, that juxtaposition is not accidental at all.
No way.
No, I think Lynn has a really good idea of what's going on with men and women. Which, especially if you've been following hip hop your whole life, it's
complicated.
Yeah, it really is. And
especially if you know the inside industry, and that a lot of women helped write NWA's songs and these things that they were involved in the background, but they never get credit for any of it. And so it gets even more complicated when you start learning about how it goes deeper and deeper.
One of the reasons I've always appreciated I've always appreciated hip hop so much, but that has been a barrier for me getting into a lot of popular hip hop songs, is the fact that there is a lot of it that gets onto the radio that is about pistol whipping cops or disrespecting women and glorifying a drug lifestyle. And that's not to say that is intrinsic in all of hip hop, nor is that to say that every song that addresses those issues is bad. Because there are times when we have to address that people coming from certain contexts will have certain point of views that need to be at least listened to and handled in a way that legitimizes their experiences without legitimizing what comes out of that and what you do with those experiences. So it's always been a barrier for me to see a genre that I appreciate, because I'm a poet and I love slam poetry. I love people who can do the things that Sage Francis or Biggie or Tupac do. Those things are incredible, and I'm able to listen to that, but then I start having this barrier to I can't applaud a disrespecting a song that disrespects women so much. But Hamilton in itself deals with that and addresses a lot of these things in a way that I was like, okay, this is my genre, this is my, it's Broadway and it's hip hop and it's history and it's relevant. And so to me, there's no person out there that can't find one thread of something inside of Hamilton that is their connection point.
Right.
This has appealed to so many people because it is history. So if you're a history buff, you love this. This has appealed to people because of it's actually good hip hop. It's good Broadway. You don't just have hip hop. You have King George coming in and singing a Beatles style breakup song with the 13 Colonies, and it's so much fun there. And so you're appealing to the Broadway side. You're appealing to the politically relevant people, and you're appealing to so many different areas that you may think, well, I've got the hip hop box and the Broadway box checked, but I don't care about history. You're still into this.
Yes.
And so it's interesting how easily it is that you can get people into that.
Well, and I think it was very relevant, especially this past year with the election cycle and everything going on.
Yeah.
You could see it. And I think that's why I think a lot of people got upset that the cast did what they did when Mike Pence showed up.
Right.
And I didn't understand it because that happened before I listened to the soundtrack.
Okay,
Then I heard it and I went, no, I totally understand. And it wasn't from a progressive or conservative side. It was once you listen to this musical, it involves you in politics. It involves you in past politics as well as current politics. So for them to stand up and speak their minds as artists It's like, yeah, you've just been, because it was after the musical was over, right? Yeah. So they are already pumped up with these ideals and thoughts that they've already had. For them to get up and say what they thought and felt, it seemed totally natural.
And there is a lot of misinformation that got spread around that in the era of post-truth politics and in the era of false news stories and that. Like, what happened there is you see the cast members standing up saying effectively, hey, we are glad you came to this show. We hope that some of the themes of this show really sink in, and we hope that you will represent us and the themes that we're trying to the themes we're trying to advance in this musical. We hope you'll take them to heart and represent all of us in your upcoming administration. And then they silenced the boos of the crowd. The crowds were booing, and they said, look, there's nothing to boo here. Let's just be respectful, ask for representation, and then move on. Yeah. But from that, there was a firestorm of responses.
If you listen to it, when he called himself, we're the newly concerned or something like that, which is fine. They weren't booing. They weren't saying you stole the election. They weren't saying anything like that. They said we're just concerned that you aren't going to represent what is basically this cast now. Yeah. And that's fine. They were just speaking their minds, which they had done the entire show. And so but I think that there was a lot of, and again, so I didn't listen to this till after the election and a little disappointed in the election. But then I heard Washington's, and it still makes me cry, his Teach Him How to Say Goodbye. Yeah. Is that the name of the Yeah. I was like, that's the point. I mean, every 4 to 8 years, we are saying goodbye. Yeah. And so I wasn't thinking necessarily of the election so much as the president that's
well, and let's say goodbye with as few gunshots and bombs as possible because we are fairly unique in history, Yeah,
definitely. We talk a lot
we
about
don't
that
have
when we
any.
do that in the
and I was sitting with my son.
I mean, Civil War is sort of a different animal. Yeah. Like, it's not really about the transition of power per se. So I don't want to say, I don't want to forget that exists, but it's not really, it wasn't about a transition.
It wasn't. It was actually about almost the same things that were being argued in this musical.
Absolutely.
And are still being argued today.
The
debate has not stopped.
That's actually, so that has been fairly useful. Okay, I was never a big fan of American history, mostly because I felt like we crammed it.
Yes.
I just, like, you get the same amount of time in school for your American history as you do for, like, world history, which now I'm annoyed at world history for whole other reasons also. Like, there is a bundle of issues there. But digging into this, it has been sort of liberating in a way to hear people say, oh, we've never been more divided. And I was like, oh, precious, this is every day.
Yeah.
This is from minute one. This is from negative minutes.
We kind of galvanize our founding fathers in this way that we think they're untouchable. The pantheon of the founding fathers. We teach this as Thomas Jefferson is this upstanding, perfect guy, and we forget about the fact that he had affairs with his slaves. We talk about George Washington as this upstanding, moral gentleman, and we forget that he created a slave, he had slaves, but then he also created a spy ring that was incredible. Like, he could smile to a foreign diplomat's face and be lying to them through his teeth, and it was incredible. And I think that's a disservice to him when we teach him in a boring way. He's a fascinating person, and we often, because we paint them as boring political figures in the pantheon of American history, we don't acknowledge that they are incredibly approachable people who did have the same battles we have today and laid that framework for this back and forth of respecting but also disagreeing with others on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think you're also looking at, of course, one of the reasons why I love great art, whether in plays or musicals or in books or whatever, requires three-dimensional characters. Shakespeare is one of my favorite writers, and the reason I love him is because all his characters are three-dimensional. They have their flaws, but they also have their goods and bad sides. Yeah. Well, the best way to do a three-dimensional character is to write about actual human people in history.
You don't get more 3D than that.
Yeah, the article, the episode you guys did on Aaron Burr. And I love the way you started out with, he's a horrible villain. It's horrible. Yeah, because that really is. You know who he reminds me of is Scaglieri in Amadeus.
I haven't seen that in so long.
Well, Scaglieri was not a villain.
Yeah.
He was just kind of not as good as Mozart.
He was just not as good as Mozart and kind of jealous of it.
And became his
pretty good.
downfall.
Still very impressive, but just not as impressive. Yeah. And that little bit of jealousy would poison many things.
Joshua,
That's
you write
interesting.
you write and tell stories all the time, so you understand an antagonist does not have to be a villain.
No.
You do not have to
The
have a
best
villain.
antagonists aren't.
And
Right.
yeah. I mean, and look, I'm also a big superhero guy, so a mustache twirling villain who is just bad to
They
be
have their
bad
place.
is also fine with me.
Yeah.
But the best ones, the best ones are, you can see that Magneto's got a couple of points.
Right.
Yes.
See, my favorite comic book premise, not my favorite comic book story, but my favorite premise is when Lex Luthor assembles all of the villains together and then he incapacitates the Justice League for a little while, and then he speaks to the world and says, hey, these heroes you've worshipped for so long have only been maintaining the status quo, stopping crime from moving forward, but I'm going to organize these people called villains, and we're going to have Poison Ivy planting gardens to feed people. We're going to have Toy Maker making prosthetic limbs for children who are disabled. We're going to have people advancing mankind instead of just holding the status quo back. And he challenged the Justice League saying, if you want to step forward and defend your actions, come forward now. But they're obviously out of the scene.
Right.
So I'm
Trickery.
thinking Lex Luthor is right. He is looking at the Justice League saying, you've not advanced mankind, you've maintained the status quo.
Right.
And so the villains who are right, at least from one perspective, are fascinating to me.
This is, I mean, without going any too much further down that rabbit trail, this is an excellent example of that three-dimensional conflict, because the response, first of all, that's usually what Superman says to Lex, is like, if you'd spend more of your genius helping the world instead of trying to murder me, we'd all be a lot better off.
Oh, yeah.
But also that the very legitimate response from the heroes would be, it's not our job to make everything perfect. And if we did, what happens when the next group comes along who isn't interested in making everything perfect for you, and you don't know what you aren't prepared for? I mean, obviously the answer, as usual, is a third way. But it's superhero comics, so there's really only two ways.
And which gets us back to Hamilton.
But the conflict is three-dimensional, right? They have points.
Yeah.
Everybody's got points.
Yes, and the system that was set up, and also the George, again, that song just brings me to tears because it's so beautiful that George Washington, because it's the fact that he did this was exactly
with purpose,
that.
Yeah.
He said, we don't need another king, emperor. We need to shift power back and forth so that no one person has complete control.
This cannot be the United States of Washington.
What if scenarios don't always benefit us? But in this case, I think that if we had a what if scenario where Hamilton just got to do whatever he wanted with the first administration, it would be a totally different United States today.
Yeah.
If we didn't have the conflicting voice of the Jeffersonians,
Right.
of the Democratic Republicans speaking up against the Federalists, saying, okay, hold off a second. We still want our states to have some say on what happens here. If we didn't have that conflicting voice, we may not have as long-standing a tradition of peaceful transition of power. We may not have that. And likewise, we needed Hamilton's voice to conflict against Jeffersonian democracies. And so we needed that style of this back and forth. And our system today even relies on that, of people holding people in check, of checks and balances between bodies of government and between parties and just different things. We have that accountability built in because all voices are supposed to be at the table.
Right.
In as much as is possible.
And it's one of the reasons why we typically do go from progressive to conservative just about every 8 years. It's just kind of America's way of holding us in check. Yeah. And now I'm not. I'm still.
That's complicated.
Yes, but it is true. It's one of the reasons why there usually isn't a third term of a president. Although I mean, even under
of a party or a ideology.
Right. The last one was Ronald Reagan into George H.W. Bush in 88 to 98. That's the last one that there's been, and that's the last one all the way going back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry Truman. So. I mean, yeah, usually every 4 to 8 years, you're switching parties. In fact, they're actually already talking about a lot of progressive groups, a lot of your left-leaning groups are making a lot of money right now and getting ready for 2018 because of this. And that's what happened. Well, that's what happened in 2008 when Barack Obama became president. All these right-leaning groups got a lot of money, and in 2010 they took over the House and Senate again. So. it's kind of set up to balance itself out.
It's true, and that has pros and cons,
yes.
like everything
yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not helpful when you have an entire party say, for the next 4 years, I'm just going to be an obstructionist. I'm going to make sure you are confined to one term, as Hamilton would say to John Adams.
Yeah.
I'm going to confine you to one term of political office. And then, it's not helpful in that regard, but it's also helpful that it keeps us from just moving down one track that recognizes one people group's perspective without allowing all of us to have a voice at the table. So when George Washington comes on the scene and he's saying history has its eyes on us, it's paying attention to what we're doing right now. This debate that you're having is actually will have ripple effects throughout history and will set the stage for so many different things. So when you see that conflict on the stage, especially in the second act of Hamilton the musical, you see that this is the American experience. This is the American experiment getting played out on the very first stage of the American administrations, and that's still what we do today.
Yeah,
we still have that
making
thing.
Those debates, and we're still fighting those. I do think we shouldn't open it up to more than two parties, but that is
Disagree.
one of my. But no, you think it should be just two
It's
parties?
too easy. I mean, it's too polarizing. It's obviously just become a fight. Either, I mean,
Well,
and
that's
again,
why I say I don't think we should have two parties.
No, not limit to two parties.
Right, I think we should have more than
Because I was going to say this is literally in the play. That it just becomes these two things, and there's no space.
And I don't.
And that's exactly what Washington warned against.
Like,
when he
don't
stepped
do
out in
that.
Speech.
Yeah.
He's like, be careful of party factions, guys.
Yeah.
And he saw forth. I swear that he just saw into the future
Yeah.
and was like, "Here's what's going to happen, and I'm warning you now not to do it." No, you guys.
I want to warn against partisan fighting.
Yeah, and well then
Pick up a pen,
if you
start
got
writing.
rid of the two-party system, if you had just one party, you can see where that actually does work in our municipal systems. Where for example, Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett is a Republican.
But it's technically nonpartisan.
But it's a nonpartisan race.
know?
So he gets voted on by Republicans and Democrat. G.T. Bynum, who just won in Tulsa, is technically a Democrat. But because it's a nonpartisan race, I think sometimes it works. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether that would work on a complete, federal scale.
I
but
think we have such a narrativized approach to politics today that the narrative we tell about federal politics is often the one that affects local politics as well. So that we do have Republican administrations in the local setting, because even if we want the government closer to the people to have more power, we still try to limit the power of that local government in a lot of ways. So the narratives we tell are important. Mm-hmm. And the narratives we buy into are important for these types of political reasons, that we will often tell stories that are so polarizing that we paint the other people as the villains of our histories, as the villains of our textbooks, in a way that we forget that Aaron Burr did a lot of incredible things,
especially
in
after
New
his
York
death.
politics. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, after
Hamilton's death. Not
after
post-mortem.
his
He was a ghost running around.
But yeah,
would see that movie.
He lived till 80. Wasn't he? He was 80 years old when he died in 1835.
I can't remember his age, but he's into his age.
But he was still done many things. Of course, he had some problems with the fact that he killed Hamilton.
Yeah, his political career was not
Yeah.
completely over, but his influence in politics, and he didn't hold a political office that did something like that. Like his conspiracy trials, when he kind of was involved in exploring the Western territories, and then, like, depending on which side of history you listen to, he may or may not have been trying to raise an army to attack Thomas Jefferson's administration and march on Washington and to steal the states.
Super excited for you guys' Burr.
That's coming up.
Yeah,
It's
it better be more than one episode.
Man, I hope it is. There's so
It might
many
be a long
things.
one.
Aaron
Yeah.
Burr was the first character. One of the things about Hamilton the musical that I love so much is that I take one of these smaller characters. Burr's not a small character, but I take someone like Lafayette or Hercules Mulligan, and I say,
You
let me
guys'
dive into
Peggy
everything
episode.
there.
Oh, yeah, Peggy was
Your
one of my
Peggy episode
favorites.
was amazing.
Yeah.
I haven't
love
gotten
talking
there
about
yet.
Peggy.
I didn't realize you guys got.
Peggy's got some really interesting actual historical stories. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
Like, it
I'm
actually
looking
sort
forward to
of, I don't want to say justifies, because obviously you can put whatever you want in your show. But I mean, the idea that she's got a very small part in the show, but why would you even then? And the answer is because she did some pretty boss stuff. Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's in the show, Peggy doesn't do anything. And so I thought, well, why?
Yeah.
And then my first thought was when I listened to it, before I listened to the podcast, was why do you put her in? Well, because there were 3 Schuyler sisters. But then you guys talked about how there were actual Schuyler brothers who are never mentioned at all.
And not only are they not mentioned, the text of the musical actually takes them out and says Angelica's singing about the reason she can't get with
has no brothers.
Hamilton. She's like, my father has no sons, so I'm the one who has to social climb for one.
Yeah, so it's weird that they would put Peggy in, but apparently
it's so fun. Okay, here we are. We're talking about how we really appreciate like the 3-dimensionality of that Hamilton brings to these historical figures. But man, that would have been a lot more complex. She was married when she met Hamilton, so she was super interested, but that was complicated and weird. That is like, but again, as a storyteller, that is a musical. That is a whole separate. That doesn't fold into this larger story. Like I hardly blame him for glossing.
Oh no, there's a lot of whenever the artistic.
I blame him a little for the leaving out the brothers and making it more about. I mean, again,
artistically though, that gives Angelica an incredible motivation to say, I cannot leave my family's lineage in complete jeopardy. But I have to, in this context, marry up, because Angelica's the surrogate that's kind of communicating the inequality of women to begin with. And she's saying that this is my role in the family. I have to find someone else to continue my father's legacy. And so John Church in history is the one that comes in, and he originally in history was not approved of by her father, and they had to elope and go do some interesting things. Later on, there was a redemption, they reconciled, and it was interesting. But I like that they had to. I appreciate that in order to tell a story, you have to flatten some of the historical elements to a limit. And so one of the things we do on our podcast is we try to wrestle with what is in this show that's historically accurate, what is in our show that is just artistically developed, but we want to remain positive about it all. There are a lot of people out there that'll say, oh, you know what, the story about Alexander Hamilton being like, about Martha Washington naming her Tomcat Hamilton after him, that was not historical, so we're not going to let that. So we're going to get complaints,
right? Or Burr being with Lee's lieutenant in the play, but not really in history. Yeah, but it doesn't ruin the play.
You have to appreciate both
introduce
sides.
A new character, and
also an uncomfortable fact of history in terms of doing it as scholarship is that there are massive points of view in your histories, and you cannot separate them. And should not try. It's not journalism. It's different.
Right.
Yes, it is.
The musical should point you to do your own research and point you to dive into some history books. If this excites you and you want to know, is that true? Was that person actually there? And did this actually happen? Pick up a book. Start reading. Go to YouTube. There's people that actually will just tell you about it on YouTube. Or listen to our podcast and we'll talk to you about it.
I can imagine, because you guys would totally do this. Lin-Manuel, I think, would be too. It would be like, oh, did you pick up a book?
Gotcha.
Our plan comes together.
And I love that when you were talking about Burr, was that Burr episode was, if you read one book, you're a clone. If you read 2 books, you're confused. And you were like, at the point, you're like, I'm just confused about Burr, because one book you were reading was positive toward him, and one was a negative toward. Well, one was the one that was based off of the Hamilton novel or Hamilton musical.
And you really need 9 or 10 to 20 different perspectives before you can really say, okay, I've formed my own perspective on this. I've read all of the primary documents. And so most people listening to the musical will have Lin-Manuel Miranda's perspective on these characters, which is filtered through Ron Chernow, who wrote the Alexander Hamilton biography. And he's a kind of an apologist for Alexander Hamilton in a lot of ways, so that he is wrestling with all of the tough issues fairly. He's fair. You can't be unbiased, but you can be fair. You can take your biases, hold them in check, and rationally, fairly present them on the page. Then there are people like Nancy Eisenberg who write the book Fallen Founders, and she's saying the life and times of Aaron Burr, and she is an Aaron Burr apologist, saying, hey, he's got the raw end of the stick. Hamilton was a jerk, and Hamilton was an elitist who was obsessed with tearing down Aaron Burr, his political opponent in New York politics. And so you see that perspective, I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I believe now? And so a lot of it comes across as contentious when she's writing, is like, hey, I'm attacking everybody who has ever written history because I'm really upset that you would say my guy Aaron Burr is a bad guy. And so you see some really interesting perspectives, and really we have to hold all of those threads together when we're trying to create a well-informed perspective on these characters, from history at least.
There's a fascinatingly, uniquely American position to be arguing over who's the bigger underdog in our pantheon of founding fathers.
Yeah.
Like, of all these super important dudes that did a bunch of really cool stuff, which one of them is more beleaguered and beaten down by the historical narrative? Yeah, there's a thing. There's a thing there.
But there's in the musical, there's the moment when Burr says, "I've looked at my history, and every time you've been and it feels like Hamilton goes, what? Because he doesn't see that.
Hey,
he doesn't see any of those
I didn't think
times.
about you that much, Burr.
It's on you at all.
This is not on purpose. You just aren't, it was him not being aggressive that was the problem.
That's one of the major themes of the musical, that you have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. So Aaron Burr's trying to tell his story, and he says the only common thread has been your disrespect, Hamilton. You've disrespected me at this point when I wanted to get onto Washington's administration and the war. You've disrespected me at this point when I wanted to become the president. You've been terribly, you've blocked my political ambitions.
Even taking Angelica away from him.
Oh yeah, that kind of moment, that exchange between them, where it's like, Burr, you disgust me. So you've discussed me. I love that.
I have never loved Aaron Burr more than that moment.
I
love where they go, hey, we're at the beginning of Helpless.
Hey, how you doing? No, but yeah, you try to tell the story as best you can. In your own making of history, you have certain things you can control. You can control your own behavior, your own responses to what is said about you. And that's one of the things that's told to Hamilton throughout this musical. You can control what you do. You don't have to respond to every single piece of accusations that are leveled against you. When Angelica, in the deleted song that didn't make it onto Broadway, but it's on the Hamilton mixtape, Congratulations, she says, you know how Jefferson gets to do all the things he gets to do? He doesn't dignify schoolyard taunts with a response. And Hamilton here is writing the Reynolds pamphlet because he thinks, I have to defend myself against everything that's said about me. I can't let anyone tarnish my reputation because I care about my political reputation so much that I'll throw my personal reputation under the table in defense of my political status.
I had to listen to that 3 times before I figured out why he wrote the Reynolds pamphlets. And I realized, because Burr mentions about rumors. Rumors might start. And it's like, so he's trying to, if there's any kind of rumors, he's going to just kill it right out.
He would rather be known as a philanderer than fraudulent. Well, which
to be fair,
understand from a very complicated Hamiltonian standpoint.
And there are a lot
of
politicians
from a Joshonian standpoint.
There are a lot of politicians at that time that survived sex scandals. Like, we didn't have the political history of someone like Jonathan Edwards trying to get the Democratic ticket, and he's really doing well, and he's about to win the primaries for a little while. Looks like he might, and then he has a sex scandal, cheats on his wife, and you realize he has no chance. He'll never going to be president now. But that hadn't existed, and there were a lot of people in the time of Alexander Hamilton. I mean, Benjamin Franklin had affairs. Like, he was a
Benjamin Franklin was like a walking sex scandal.
And so he thought, I can survive a sex scandal. I can't survive people telling me that I was embezzling money.
I was in charge of the nation's funds, and I took some of them.
He even mentions in the Reynolds pamphlet that people already had an idea of him being sexual promiscuous. That whole Tomcat thing. That people already have these ideas, and he's just going to go with that and be fine with it.
Yeah, but it's just they're not thinking about his wife.
Exactly. Yes. And there is the biggest fail to me.
And I loved episode 3 on the Schuyler Sisters when you guys thought about the fact that Hamilton might not be about Alexander Hamilton.
It's about the legacy of Eliza.
It's about Eliza.
How she advances it.
Yeah, she might be the main character.
I think it was the third or fourth time that I listened to it, and the first time she sings out Eliza, I went, because it made my heart skip because you love that character so much.
She's so amazing, so strong.
And when she does the no in the taking myself out of the narrative, burn.
Burn.
When she just no over again, it fades. She's like, I'm like.
The 3 beat that you get with her where she says, I just want to be a part of the narrative. Let me be a part of the story that's being told someday. And then she says in Burn, I'm taking myself out of it. Yeah. And then in the final scene, she says, I'm placing myself back into the narrative. Right. And you see that her passion is telling the story of the people she loves, her family. She helps to raise funds for the Washington Monument to tell the story of George Washington. She cares more about telling the story of other people. And that's why the story that is focused on Eliza's story arc is all about her husband, is all about these other people around him and around her. And you see that she goes from this person who steps on the scene and she is helpless And you see that she's just head over heels infatuated with this guy. And you can feel in love and infatuated and still be a strong, empowered woman. But she has this scene where she's helpless. And then eventually you see she's taking control of the narrative. She's owning this. And by the end, she is telling the story. And she is the one that continues living almost to the time of the Civil War. She was the oldest living spouse of a founding father that made it that long. She almost got to see the states that Alexander Hamilton helped to unite get divided, and she was active in American politics, at least in doing the networking with politicians for a very long time.
I think you also see, you see that she is immediately stronger. She crops up some. But helpless is the big introduction, and then the next big Eliza is her saying, "Let me be part of the narrative." Like, just this thing that we're doing here is equally important to the thing that you're doing over there, which Hamilton did not believe, right? Pretty demonstrably didn't believe. But then the next time, I think the next time you see her, she's raising Philip.
Yes.
And
teaching him and playing piano.
And again, this is kind of subtextual, and I'm reading Chernow's book slowly, so I am interested to see where this lands. But as a parent, I'm imagining Hamilton was not present. Like, I know he took care of a lot of children and orphans, and they had a lot of children, but as far as what we would consider being a present parent,
there's a lot of that. Like, he did take a couple of the kids down with him to Philadelphia to live with him, while the rest were with Eliza in New York. Like, there were times when he was actively engaged in raising the kids. There's a story. There's also 200 years of parental expectation in between me and him. Right.
But just looking at this,
a difference in time, like, where you can be involved in politics today and come home and have dinner with your children. Then being involved in politics often meant you were traveling out of state for months away, months at a time, and really far away. You just couldn't be at home if you were involved in politics.
Yeah,
you see that a lot in Adam's life. If you watch like the Adams documentary, you see that he just had to leave and be like, came back years later and saw his kids and was like, I don't recognize any of you because I've been in politics.
Right. Okay. I had been kind of feeling like that. Listen to Hamilton. Then you guys talking about in more depth about Adams. Like, it's just, again, it's part of that legacy is that they were obviously all aspiring to what Dad was, but the actual becoming a human being was mostly Eliza.
Yeah.
Now again, I'm slowly working through Chernow, so I don't. This is based 100% on me reading things into the musical, which also has an Eliza perspective that may or may not be.
I think that's an interesting and important critical piece of the musical itself. That you see, Alexander Hamilton's ambition becomes his folly. Like, the whole arc of the story is that he rises to power, and you get a happy ending if you stop at the end of the first act, and then he falls from power, and you get a really sad ending at the end of the musical. But Eliza, throughout it all, is the consistent voice saying that, hey, let me be enough. Let me and our family be enough. We don't need a legacy. We just need time with you. And so you see her multiple times throughout the musical saying the word enough, saying, let me be enough. And then the way that is used throughout the musical, where she starts off saying, just stay alive, and that would be enough. Like, I want you to be alive. Yeah. Then let me be a part of it, and let our family be enough for you. You don't need a legacy. So it's a little bit closer and a little more intimate, where you say, let me be enough. And then at the final scene, when she's getting ready to go off to the duel with Aaron Burr, she says, come to bed. Like, stay a while. That would be enough. And so it's an invitation and a movement towards intimacy, where she is saying, hey, come to bed with me in this moment. Share our marital... Like, she is someone who is actively getting closer and closer to Hamilton, and her family is her passion. Yeah. She says it doesn't matter if you're fighting for this country and you don't have something to fight for. You need to fight for your family and then enjoy your family, and let us be enough. Let us be the thing that you love more than the glory, more than the fame, and more than the power. And that, to me, is beautiful. When you put Alexander Hamilton's ambition next to her contentment but strength. Not complacency, but contentment in what she has. It's incredible.
And if you really make her the protagonist, then that's why you feel so bad for her when the Reynolds pamphlets come out.
Right. And and in the end, she's the reason that the legacy continues. Yes. So she says, you don't need a legacy, but she's the reason why his legacy lasts. Yeah. And one of my favorite parts
of the $10 bill probably if she hadn't done what she did.
One of my favorite parts of the whole musical is the very, very end and you can argue whether it's Hamilton showing her this or it's Lin-Manuel himself as on the role there. Showing her on stage as they take her to the edge of the stage, in the stage performance, and they say, "Look," and they wave to the audience and say, "We're telling your story.
Yeah,
This is what's happening. Look at how far it's come. Because of you, look at how far this legacy has reached, and how far Hamilton's life has touched people, and how far your life has touched people." And it's just so beautiful that there's so many layers to that right there.
She's singing,
it's
"Will
amazing.
they tell your story after all I've done?" And they finally break that fourth wall, and they are telling his story.
Yeah.
And
This
this
musical exists. Now,
Here's my big downer moment, though. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, Eliza as the protagonist, is it actually her or Alexander?
And I would say Hamilton is the protagonist,
Yeah.
but there's an argument to be made.
And I would agree, but the fact that you can even kind of turn it is some pretty complex storytelling.
Yeah.
But the sad part is that if she is the protagonist, I mean, it's obviously a tragedy if Alexander is the protagonist. It's also kind of a worse tragedy if Eliza is the protagonist, because her ideals are sacrificed in the end to give her dead husband the thing he always wanted, and she never gets the thing she actually wanted.
true.
Although
I knew who
it's
Alexander Hamilton was. I did not know who Eliza was until
It depends on what you put as her primary motive, though.
That's true.
Because if her motive is
It switches.
the family values, it does. She becomes
That's the
much more
thing.
Hamiltonian in the end,
Right.
and so she changes. She has probably the greatest arc.
I'm
there.
bundling that into the part of her personal tragedy. Like
That's
she
fair,
spends
yeah.
now.
She
I have a
concedes to her
specific point of view. But I mean, if you're going to look at her, as the protagonist, and that her ideals throughout the thing are let me / us be enough, that we are the foundation for all of this other stuff that you do, and then in the end she sacrifices it. Now, I mean, I don't think she booted all of her children out on the street and stopped taking care of them,
Of course not.
or anything like that. But I mean, she shifts the focus of her energies from inward at home or with this family outward to everybody needs to know who my Hamilton was.
Moving from we don't need a legacy to let me defend this legacy.
To by God, you're going to have one if it kills me.
That's right. And
BT Dubs, it killed me.
But even,
I mean,
but even more toward the opening the orphanage and things like that, she was still thinking about family and children that she had experience with Hamilton. You're right. I think that she had. It's still incredible storytelling. That
I
we
try
can
not
have
to
this
think
discussion.
when I had that thought. I try really hard not to think about it very much because I was like,
Yeah.
oh crap!
It's so easy to go. This person's the good guy or protagonist. Here's the villain,
Very
and they're in
three-dimensional,
this with this show. You really can't do it.
Yeah.
I want it because we're coming to the end. I want to talk about. I like I said, I've only got to episode 10. Do you guys talk about hip hop influences? And I know you're sprinkled in.
Yeah.
Do you have an episode where you talk about what music? Because I'm wondering because I'm not into hip hop. What music should I be listening to if I dig Hamilton?
Oh, that's a really complicated question.
Yeah, it is. Well, the thing is, it spans so much of hip hop, and we bring it up over and over again as it comes up in the musical when they do make specific references. And I think they start to get more heavy as you go on. I think as you'll listen more to the podcast, you'll hear more of them now than you did before. But we will pull out all the parts where he references specifically certain lyrics from obviously Biggie and Tupac and DMX at certain times and these certain things.
All the way back to Grandmaster Flash.
Yeah, all the way back.
Yes.
And so it just really does span everything. And so there's no clear-cut answer to that, except if you were like, I really like this song or the way this lyric is done, and I could be like, oh, well, you want to listen to this.
Yeah, if
Right.
you like Hamilton's internal rhymes and his dense rhyming, then you may like Big Pun, dead in the middle of Little Italy, little did we know that we riddled some middlemen who didn't do diddly. That'd be great for you. If you appreciate the slower stuff, then maybe go a different route.
If you like battles and stuff that is doing something a little more, or a battle style, but is doing something a little more than some of that street life stuff, you should look in the direction of Mos Def. Oh wait,
Yeah.
he's not going as Mos Def. I can't think of his crap.
He's not Mos Def anymore.
He's not Mos Def anymore.
Oh, I didn't
or
even know
Talib
this.
Kweli.
Most definitely not.
or them, or better yet, for the feel of battles, them together on Black Star was ridiculous.
One of the things
They're not battling each other, but they keep that real fast battle rhyme style as they pass verses back and forth, and it's pretty great.
Sage Francis also has a lot of underground political raps that he does.
You just got done
I
with
mentioned
listening
that,
to that.
yeah.
Listening to, and I was like, okay, now you've got my attention because that's what I would probably be really interested. Because what we talked about earlier on in the podcast was about the some of the misogyny that is in, and that I'm like, I was never had a problem with the Ice-T, the cop killer stuff, because like, dude, that's your life, you know.
Yeah, that's fair.
Especially at that time and the areas they lived in.
So I was, whereas a lot of the conservatives were like, how could he say things like that? Well, it's like, dude, that's what he grew up with.
Yeah, so the police were killing them at that time. And
but some of the misogyny, I'm like,
exactly.
Okay, so not defending misogyny by any stretch, but the misogyny also sort of has a very cultural foundation from which to build. It's not defensible. I mean, so do not mishear me. But I mean, I've read a few things, but most recently I finished Can't Stop, Won't Stop, and which is like a total history of hip hop from Brooklyn through.
It's amazing.
It's really good.
I really want to dive into that.
But I mean, so even that again. Bucking authority figures, I still would consider much more defensible by a long stride than the misogyny. But even that, you can take a step back. Even the that's why I feel a little condescending now, asking for rap to become something a little, I guess, more literary, because actually the street life stuff now I think it's selling records. But real talk, NWA was doing something amazing and unheard of. I mean, it's a little just like all art.
Yes,
a little historical perspective and cultural context goes a long way.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to ask the purpose of some of the art. Some of hip hop is made to represent an experience and express something that is not expressed in a lot of ways. So you're validating the upbringing of a person who grew up in the projects, or someone that is experiencing this, and giving a voice to an experience that is often neglected by those of us four white guys with privilege sitting around a table. We don't have that story as a part of our own narratives as much. And then, so you have that voice that's there. You also have the roots of hip hop as protest music, as music that's supposed to go against the grain of something in society. And that's the part of it that's always appealed to me, where you see people using hip hop to advance either a political message or a social message, to say, hey, you know, this thing that you have like just grown accustomed to, let's change that a little bit and let's war against it, because that's not okay. That's not okay to continue staying in there. And so I think both of those reasons for hip hop have their purpose and have their place. You have to represent the experience, represent the voice, give a platform for it, and validate that experience. You also have to war against the context that makes that experience required, or that certain things
that normalizes it.
That normalizes it. Yes, fair. Yeah.
And sometimes it is art. So sometimes it is about shocking.
Sometimes
and
it's
getting
supposed
some
to
people's
hurt.
attention.
Yeah. Sometimes it's supposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's kind of, without going way deep, that's kind of the NWA experience that I'm talking about, that I did not get the first time that I was listening to NWA, because I was like 14. Yeah. I mean, you know, and very comfortable and Caucasian and right here in Oklahoma.
Yes.
That the idea that it was from a certain perspective just as sensationalized for the intended audience as it was for me, in a different way. Yeah. So basically, I recommend Can't Stop, Won't Stop.
Right.
To the original question, also, Lin-Manuel Miranda put together playlists of music that inspired him when he was creating Hamilton.
Yes.
And I think you can maybe still find those on Spotify. If not, I'm sure they're all over the internet. Just Google Lin-Manuel Miranda inspiration playlists, and you will find those, I'm sure. And then, of course, listen to some of the cast members who have their own albums. Daveed Diggs is amazing. He does a lot of work. He has a lot of different albums where he's at least a contributor, if not the main person on those albums. It's so much fun to listen to. And of course, Chris Jackson just re-released his big release. Yeah. And I think there's a few others on
Leslie
there.
Leslie Odom Jr. has a self-titled album out now.
Yeah.
Does he really?
Yes. It's beautiful. He also did like Christmas album and some Christmas work.
Yeah, do it.
He's the other reason why I think Aaron Burr works.
Oh yeah, he sells
because
it so well.
He's an amazing singer, actor. I mean, just all around talent. So you care about, you know. I mean, you could have the greatest villain in the world if he's not played by the right person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the Hamilton mixtape now, so you can listen to music inspired by, and then songs that were taken out of, and then remixes of the songs that are already in there. And some of those songs that are inspired by are amazing. There's one just called Immigrants, We Get the Job Done, and you think it's going to be like a remake of that song where that line's included, but it's not. They just take that line, they talk about the immigration experience, and they talk about what it's like being an immigrant in America.
I've played it so many times now.
And I love it when they start breaking out in the raps super fast in other languages. And it's just like their home languages, their native tongues. They're just going to start rapping those. I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I have no idea what you're saying.
Right.
This is so amazing, though.
There is possibly nothing more hip hop. I mean, seriously, than the concept of a Hamilton mixtape.
Yeah.
To watch all of these other influences like come down into one person, into this one show, and then to just turn around and go right back out and get immediately remix. Even if you just take a song and just do a remix and no new lyrics necessarily, just give it at the DJ level like a whole different spin. It's like there is no more hip hop concept than we're going to boil all this down to the breaks, and then it's going to become this whole other thing. We're going to boil all this down, to this Hamilton experience, and then it's going to go out and become all this other stuff. It's pretty great.
Finding your place in the American narrative is something that this musical does on the regular. Like this is about people being able to hear their story, and finally a lot of people are able to look at a black man playing the first American president and see, oh my goodness, this America actually has a place for me. And so when you hear that in hip hop, you hear, okay, that story you're telling, that's my story. I have a place. I can do this. I am empowered now because that's a story that I can appreciate, and I have a place in this story. And so one of the beauty that takes us all the way back to where we started this with the casting calls, and you see, I mean, Oak, the guy who plays Hercules Mulligan, and then James Madison in the second act, he talks about how I get to play the role of a guy that I never, ever, ever would have associated myself with when I was growing up. But now I see that this America has a place for me.
Right.
This story that we've been telling doesn't have to ostracize and marginalize people of color. This story is something that has often done that. We have often told American history in a way that ostracizes and pushes out and blocks certain people and puts a glass ceiling above other people. And we actually have a place in the narrative where we can advance the story of America because history has its eyes on us as well. We too are doing American politics now. We too are doing social discourse now. And what are we going to do with the power that's been handed to us, the torch that has been passed? Are we going to fan the Hamilton torch into a flame, or are we going to let that die down and end that frame of mind, and we're going to do something new with it? So the question of who tells your story and what are you going to do now that history is going to look back on you and remember you is one of the biggest takeaways of Hamilton, an American musical. And so the fact that all these conversations are starting with, hey, I'm inspired by this conversation about immigrants. That's where I associate. That's where I connect with this. I'm going to take that into the next realm. That's powerful, and that's good art.
Okay, we're going to have to close it up, but I do have one more question, because I've listened to the whole soundtrack, and of course I miss there's that song that's missing, which I'm looking so forward to hearing someday.
Are you talking about the John Lawrence? Okay, yeah.
But I do have to,
because I need to cry in the first act also.
Yeah. Is this a musical or an opera?
There is a debate to be had about that for sure. It is an opera in the sense that Rent is an opera. In the sense that it like Rent is a rock opera that advances all the lyrics in the songs. You see that in Hamilton, an American musical as well, that all of the lyrics are in the songs, all the movement and the progression is in that. But it, I think, lies in how you define opera and how you define musical. Right. And so it's being branded as a musical. And
because no one wants to brand it as an opera,
right?
Because opera has its own, it
has its own connotations.
It's become another thing. I mean, there's your cultural or historical context for art. Is that now I would make no distinction between a German language opera and an Italian language opera, and yet at a certain point in art history, it was like, that's not opera, it's in German.
Right.
I mean,
See, I'm comfortable calling it a hip hop opera, but I feel like it needs that qualifier of hip hop, or else it's
you're
miscommunicating
going to go and expect something different.
I could accept hip hop opera, because it's just like Jesus Christ Superstar, when it first came out, people were reticent to call it an opera also, although they called it a rock opera. Same thing with Tommy's The Who.
It's worth doing.
Tommy, excuse me.
Opera means something now. Yeah. So saying it's a rock opera or a hip opera.
Yeah, and hip opera. It sounds amazing.
Hip hop opera.
Wait, somebody did a
Why are we not calling it a hip opera? Because that is fantastic.
Somebody did a Night at the Hip Opera album, and now I'm going to figure out who it was.
But anyway, I just wondered, because it is all music.
It was the Kleptones. BT Dubs. Kleptones did a Night at the Hip Opera. I own that. I just couldn't remember who it was. I knew I'd heard that somewhere.
Are there words in that? Cause I don't know if there are. It's all driven by the songs, right?
It is all driven by the songs, and even when there is more spoken dialogue, there's music in the background. Right. There's something happening there, unless it's one of those moments from the original cast album you can listen to it where the music drops out and there is a beat without a melody. And no beat, no melody, and you hear them just kind of speaking it, even in rhythms at that point. And so it is driven by the songs. Everything, that's one of the beauties about this original cast album is you can get the entire story from just listening to the album.
Yeah, that's one of the things. It's a lot of some people saying, "Oh, well, you can." When I was thinking about getting this, a lot of people were like, "Well, it's not as good as the musical, but I guess you can." I'm like, well, if you're not going to be able to see the musical,
to me, gatekeeping in any community like that is just inappropriate sometimes. In Hamilton, you should be able to be a Hamilton fan. However, at whatever level you've approached this, like if you've just listened to a couple of the songs, you're like, oh my goodness, what is this? I'm amazed by this. I'm not going to look at you and say, look, I have a podcast and I'm going to talk down to you now because I've read this many biographies about every one of those characters and the thing you're liking. No, this is something I want everyone to come in and love. I want you to experience this where you are and enjoy it and appreciate it. And so don't be an elitist about it.
Yeah. I want to open a dance club and just have this being played so people come in that love it and just run around singing it. And
some of the songs in this are incredible workout songs.
Oh, yeah. I haven't tried that one yet. I haven't tried that one.
You have to skip some.
They do have like whole workout things based around it now. There's people doing that where they're building classes based off Hamilton workouts.
Oh, that's awesome. See that? Because especially if you do a lot of the cardio stuff.
I was about to say, I want to make like really specific name exercises really specifically after Hamilton related things. I'm not having an idea right now, but it would be hilarious. Shut up.
As soon as you do, tweet it. We'll let everyone know.
You got to feel that burn.
Hamilton exercises.
Feel the burn.
Sure.
Or feel the burr, if you will.
Yes.
No. Actually, no, I'm not going to judge you for that because I keep trying to turn Aaron Burr into a Bring It On joke, and I haven't quite managed it.
I keep trying to fit Hamilton into something about hamstrings. I'm not getting it, though.
See, this is what I mean. Like, there's an idea there, but it would take more workshopping than we have right now.
Of course, yeah. If you had a football player saying, I pulled a Hamilton, that's a little weird. That's good. Where do you guys, does Hamilton the podcast have its own Twitter or Facebook account?
It's
all in graphic.
Let's talk about
all
of Vinton's various podcasts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I run the Graphomania Podcast Network, and it has 4 different podcasts at the moment: the Hamilton Podcast, the Read Brave Comics Podcast, the Hancock Creative Podcast, and the Botchcast Role Playing Podcast, of which these fine gentlemen are
I am on some of these.
Yeah. I think there's be another one. Is that what I ended
yes, we have had a discussion, I think, since the last time we were on talking about podcasts. We were talking about doing a Hopefully Not Heretics podcast, which is a theology podcast where you're basically free to share whatever theologies you may hold, whether they are not the common Orthodox.
And may God have mercy on your soul.
And so we can have those open discussions and feel a safe place to discuss
in Oklahoma,
things.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Through the
well,
airwaves,
it's a pretty small club so far, so...
But yeah, you can find us on Twitter at Graphocast, it's GRAPHOCAST, or at graphocast.com, GRAPHOCAST.com. You can also find all those podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or YouTube. I think Hamilton is the only one that has every single episode on YouTube because I'm slow, but I make sure to get them all up on YouTube for Hamilton at least, so you can check all those out there.
There you go. And you yourself are at
Flesh Eater, like a zombie.
And I'm
Robbie,
and I am at Alpha Knight.
There we go. That's going to do it for our show. You can find us on our brand new website, okiegeek.com, also on Twitter and Facebook at Okie Geek Podcast. That's also the address for our Gmail account. Would love to hear from you. You can also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes. And Joshua, where can people find you on the World Wide Web?
On Twitter at Joshua Unruh, and on the World Wide Web at joshuaunruh.com. Go and sign up for the mailing list, or just listen to the podcast because you're going to hear about all my projects one way or the other.
He's got his own website. And you can find me at KOSU Michael C. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast. Also rate us and leave a comment. Until next time, along with Robbie Hurlocker and Vinton Bayne, I'm Michael Cross.
And I'm Joshua Unruh.
Reminding you to keep calm and geek on.